Morning or afternoon, everybody. Happy Valentine's Day, and welcome to the SafetyChain Leadership Series. And today's topic for Valentine's Day, near and dear to your heart, GFSI Approved Supplier Programs, Best Practices and Keys to Success, with our very special guest, Dr. Tatiana Lorca from Ecolab. I'm Barbara Levin. I will be your host as well as one of your presenters today. Let me give you a few housekeeping announcements before I introduce Tatiana and we get on with our presentations. We are being hosted for this event today by WebEx. Should you have any technical issues, you can call WebEx technical support directly at 877-509-3239. A copy of the slides and a recording of today's event will be sent by email to all of you by close of business on Tuesday. We will be taking your questions at the end of the presentations. I'll be taking us out of full screen at that time, and you'll be able to enter your questions online. And we are anticipating a lot of questions, and we will stay on a few extra minutes if we need to make sure that we get to as many of them as possible. Also, for your privacy, you should be able to see the names of our hosts and presenters and your name, but not the names of the other attendees on today's event. We've got a very full agenda for you. We're going to try to get a lot of information on GFSI approved vendor programs. Tatiana is going to start really with a look at what GFSI is and isn't. We're going to look at what's required for vendor approval, performance monitoring, documentation, and more. Best practices, the commitments that are required from management and the resource commitments that you'll need for a successful program, how these programs can actually help you prepare for FSMA. Tatiana will tell us a little bit about how Ecolab can help, and then I'll be giving you a brief look at how food safety chain management technology can help you automate many of the components of your GFSI approved vendor programs, and then we'll take your questions. And with that, I'm very excited to welcome back to our leadership series Dr. Tatiana Lorca. She's one of our favorite speakers here. She's the manager of food safety education and training for Ecolab Food and Beverage. She is the co-chair of the GFSI Global Markets Technical Working Group and a frequent speaker worldwide on GFSI topics. I think many of you were at her last webinar, and with that, Dr. Lorca, welcome, and we're very excited to have you for our Valentine's Day series today. So we're going to turn it over to you and let you take it away.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate you joining us today on this hopefully much warmer day for you than it is for us here in Virginia. As Barbara mentioned, we have a lot to talk about today, so let's go ahead and get started. Well, I first want to talk about GFSI, what it is and what it's not. And for me, it's usually much easier to explain what GFSI is not. GFSI is not a food safety standard. It's not an auditing company. It's not a bunch of out-of-touch people making stuff up. It's not the food safety mafia, although that's my favorite term for GFSI. It is just really a whole bunch of very passionate food safety and quality assurance professionals from all over the world working for a lot of different kinds of companies, food manufacturers, food service companies, retailers, and service providers from all over the world. And we all have a lot of things in common. We're global, we're professionals, and what we want to do is to help improve the safety and the efficiency and capability across the whole supply chain, no matter what the size of business. So we've worked with programs for big companies, for little companies, so we always have a lot going on within GFSI. One of the things that you all might be very familiar with is the GFSI recognition process. And this is usually what this uses to explain what it means when a company says, hey, I need you to get a GFSI audit, or I need you to implement a GFSI-recognized program. I'll explain this very briefly, but basically what it means is that this is one of the big initiatives that the Global Food Safety Initiative does. And what they do is, instead of creating a food safety standard, they actually created a guideline, a guidance document, and now we're on version 6.3, which addresses the requirements that a good food safety standard needs to have in order to receive the seal of approval or the thumbs up from the GFSI. So we start with the bits and pieces of what the standard needs to have, and that's designed by multiple stakeholders from different parts of the industry, manufacturers, retailers, auditing companies, service providers, and it addresses food safety best practices. And this includes your basics, your prerequisite programs, requirements for HACCP, and then requirements for having management system requirements, which is what I call the discipline that makes a food safety standard work. And then there's the protocol, and the protocol is simply, what are the rules that need to be carried out in order for a food safety program to be put in place and to be audited. And this addresses things like how the audit and certification process works, what qualifications the auditors need to have, and then some higher level requirements to make this a valuable process as well as a credible process with quite a bit of oversight. The two pieces together, the standard and the protocol, create what's called the scheme, and it's actually the scheme what GFSI recognizes. And in the U.S., we usually don't call it the scheme because it has some weird negative connotations to it, but we typically just call it the GFSI recognition process for either a scheme or for a food safety management system program. And you might be familiar with some of these GFSI recognized programs, and some of these logos will look very familiar to you. The status of recognition is always posted on www.mygfsi.com. And there's quite a few of them there. Some cover the entire chain, some don't, and some are more popular in some parts of the world than the others. But what I'm going to do is I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'm just going to concentrate on the ones that we see to be most popular in the Americas, or rather North America. And that is SQF, BRC, IFS, and FSSC 22000. Now, I could spend an entire day talking about the highlights of each one of these programs, and actually I do have multiple day courses on these, but I just want to give you the real super high level to these. SQF, the Safe Quality Food Code, it addresses food safety and quality management. It's a U.S.-based program. It's owned by the Food Marketing Institute. The current code in effect is Edition 7.1. It's the only program that has multiple levels. And the thing that's really unique about SQF is that it requires the user to create a HACCP-based food quality plan in order to provide enhanced control over quality for those who choose to go up to that level. And as of a few weeks ago, it requires that 1 out of every 3 certification audits be unannounced. BRC, this is a food standard. It's owned by the British Retail Consortium. It's UK-based, and it is, again, a food safety management system, but only addresses food manufacturing. And it does integrate quality control throughout the standard. It doesn't have any levels, and it does have 2 unannounced audit option programs, but at this point they are optional. And then FSSC 22000, this is the Food Safety System Certification 22000, and it's owned by a consortium, and this addresses food safety management for food manufacturing facilities only, and it combines the ISO standard for food safety, which is 22000, and the ISO 22002-1, which addresses the prerequisite programs for food manufacturers. And this program can be combined with other management system schemes from ISO to cover other things like ISO 9001 for quality management. And this program tends to appeal to facilities that have ISO-based systems. And then IFS. And we're starting to see more and more IFS in the U.S., but primarily on the broker side of the business, pardon me, not broker, but food distribution and transportation. So what we term as logistics. And this is a food safety and management system for food logistics, and it does have an unannounced audit option as well. The thing that all of these have in common, as I mentioned in the previous slide about GFSI, is it covers most of the food safety bits and pieces and quality management pieces. They all have those in common, but they do things a little bit differently. And then they all require that a facility have an initial audit and then a certification, as well as annual recertification audits. Now, we're just going to address these real quick and just say that, again, these programs all cover the same requirements but in slightly different ways, and that is the prerequisite programs, HACCP, and management system requirements, as well as the protocol. And why does one supplier select one over the other? Well, at the end of the day, some folks like one better than the other. Sometimes the market share has sways towards one versus the other. For example, in the UK, since those folks wrote the BRC, they tend to be very partial to the BRC. In the US, we tend to see a little bit more SQF, although BRC is rising very quickly. And for example, in Europe, and for a lot of companies that supply into the European markets, we tend to see IFS. So ultimately, it really varies. Sometimes we see a commodity push. For example, in the U.S., we tend to see more dairies doing SQF than the other programs. Distribution and logistics facilities are starting to take up IFS, and then we tend to see a lot more BRC standards in bakery operations. Sometimes it's a company culture. Sometimes folks feel more comfortable with one or the other. I had some customers that started with one and then switched to another because they felt that one felt better and worked better for their business. Sometimes you might have an end user, such as a retailer or a manufacturer, if you are co-manufacturing product, who may say, hey, you know what, we want you to do this one over the other. So there's lots of different factors that enter into which one works best for the other than the other for a facility. And sometimes a facility wants to integrate their food safety management system with other food safety programs or other quality management systems. And this is the case with FSSC 22000 that we're seeing, is that a lot of the facilities that are doing this already have ISO 9001 in place for quality. Some also have 14001 for environmental management systems. So for them, it's just a much better fit for them to be able to easily slip in the FSSC 22000 program. And another thing that we see is that there are some parts of the food industry that have created their own modules to be integrated into these different standards. So, for example, McDonald's for a long time had their own audit program, and now they've actually been working with SQF, BRC, and others to create a McDonald's audit module so that when the auditor goes out to do, let's say, an SQF or BRC audit, they can also do the McDonald's audit at the same time. Now, that's the brief background, and now we're going to get into the actual requirements for purchasing and suppliers. And this is, I'm going to show you guys the Global Food Safety Initiative requirements within the guidance documents. So under the GFSI, which is going to be the base requirement for all of the GFSI-recognized programs, purchasing is addressed. And basically what it's saying here is that the standard owner and therefore the plant needs to control purchasing. These controls need to extend to externally sourced materials as well as services. So think about contract service providers. All of these that have an effect on food safety of the product. What they also require is that purchased materials conform to requirements, and that also any processes that are outsourced, such as, let's say that a facility is making chocolate-covered peanuts, and they send the peanuts to another facility to get enrobed in chocolate, and then they bring that product back into the facility. That would be considered an outsourced process. So that's purchasing. And then supplier performance also has to be addressed. And basically what the GFSI requirements that underlines all these programs requires is that there be some kind of procedure in place to evaluate, approve, and to continually monitor the suppliers, and that any evidence, such as results of evaluations, investigations, and follow-up actions, be available, be recorded. Then GFSI also links purchasing and suppliers to other parts of a food safety management system, such as the specification requirements, non-conforming materials. So if materials don't meet specification, for some reason they need to be dealt with under the non-conforming materials program, and corrective action, as well as vehicle inspections. They all get, are somehow in some way, shape, or form associated with supplier management. So let's look at these programs side by side, and I did this at a really high level and to address sort of the general requirements as summarized by the GFSI guidance documents. And you'll see on the left-hand side that I've addressed the general requirements, and then on the right I'm addressing the SQF code as it stands now, edition 7.1, the BRC Standard for Food Safety, issue 6, FSSC 22000 as it stands now, and the IFS program for food and logistics, which have very similar requirements when you are thinking about supplier management. So if we look at supplier approval and monitoring program, you'll see that across the board, the little green tick marks. This shows you that all of these programs have this as a requirement. So they all require that there be a program in place, that it be documented, and that be implemented. Now what I've done below that is I've added a little bit of text which says, okay, well, in addition, each one of these programs requires this. So for example, the SQF program requires that a facility also have a register of approved suppliers. And what a register is, I always say that it's just Australian for list, because it's just a list of the different approved suppliers that a facility would have. The next item, that this program address everything that could address the safety and the quality of the product. So this would include that suppliers of raw materials, ingredients, packaging materials. These would be your direct contact packaging, as well as potentially your secondary packaging, which would not touch the product, but it would contain the marketing information or be part of the structure and support of the product packaging, as well as services, which could impact the safety and the quality of the product. So a service, for example, could potentially be, like in the case of Ecolab, it could be the provision of chemicals to a facility, so cleaning and sanitation chemicals. So what the programs all require is that the Approved Supplier Program address all of these, but in addition, the SQF code says, oh, by the way, you have to prove that the materials that are being provided are suitable. And what this directly translates to from a paperwork perspective, for example, would be that you have, for example, a letter of guarantee available for the material that you're going to use. Or let's say that you're talking about an ingredient. You might have a certificate of analysis as well for that ingredient. BRC says, yep, you need to do that too, but also you need to address product legality, because within BRC, the big focus of the BRC is not just food safety and meeting customer requirements, but also assuring that the product is legal. FSSC also requires the addition of this program or the folks that are designing this supplier program to address how capable the supplier is to produce the material and take that into account when they're designing the program. And then also to address protecting and controlling bulk receiving access and discharge. So if you think about a liquid dairy operation, for example, that is making pasteurized milk, they would have an area where the bulk tankers are received with the raw milk, and there will be hookups which will hook the tanker directly to the receiving area. And those have to be protected so that no one messes with them from a food defense perspective, and also so that no one accidentally releases material which does not pass the requirements of the facility into the facility for processing. And we know that in most liquid dairies, part of the pass-fail involves things like checking somatic cell count, checking for specific antibiotic residues, and other things. Now, if we look at the contract manufacturers portion near the bottom, is that any contract manufacturing operations or any outsourced operations need to be addressed. So I'll highlight here that BRC says that this also needs to address the contract manufacturer's ability to hygienically manufacture and trace the materials that they are supplying to the certified site, and that the certified site must also declare to the brand owner that this activity is taking place. So let's say that your facility is manufacturing private label milk for one of the top 3 large retailers in the U.S., then you would have to let them know if you were doing BRC, if any part of your process was being outsourced to another party, and that all this needs to be added to the food safety plan and declared. And then IFS also requires that this information be integrated into the facility's documentation. A few more. All the programs require that the suppliers be ranked on a risk basis. So, for example, for a facility which is making a high-risk ingredient for a food manufacturer, they would probably require more material and more stringent controls from that facility than from a facility that was simply supplying something which was less important or less risky. What the BRC standard then says is, well, if you have you also must conduct a risk assessment of the material or service and make sure that's documented. A lot of times folks will actually document that within their HACCP program or food safety plan. Both SQF and BRC require that there be a contingency program in place. In the event, as in the case for SQF, they specify you need to take certain actions in the event you can't get stuff from your approved suppliers, so in emergency situations. And then BRC further addresses that you need to take into account the times where the brand owner may specify the approved supplier that you're supposed to be using for a particular material, or if you're going to purchase materials from an agent. They all require that materials be proven that they are suitable, but again, that the suitability be validated and that records be available. And then they also require that there be defined criteria for the supplier. For example, do they have, what kinds of food safety and quality controls do they have in place, and that this be supported by evidence. And what this boils down to is the fact that the certified facility has to define what they can live with on a day-to-day basis and what controls they will hold their ingredients and service providers to, and then require that evidence and then look at that evidence. So BRC says, yep, you'll do that, and they also provide the option of having a survey. And then IFS Logistics and the food standard require that manufacturers be certified to the IFS or an equivalent unless otherwise specified by the brand owner. And then the last three, that there be defined criteria for the material and service providers, such as specifications, requirements, or letters of conformance, and these are supported by evidence, and this is across the board. BRC, in addition, requires that the facility specify the origin of these materials, and IFS also requires this if it's required by the brand owner. And then they all require that incoming vehicles be inspected, and of course, the appropriate corrective action taken. And then all of these also link to the Conforming Products Program. So in essence, all the GFSI-recognized schemes will require the following: that materials and services be purchased from an approved supplier or suppliers, that there be a supplier approval and monitoring program in place, that it be documented, that it be implemented, that criteria be established for these suppliers, and that this criteria be supported by evidence, and that criteria is established for materials and services, and again, this be supported by evidence. So how do you translate all these requirements into a successful program? Well, you have to have a program. It's got to be documented, implemented, and maintained, regardless of the program that you're following. Within this program, you need to include suppliers of all your inputs, which may impact the safety, the quality, and the legality of your finished product. You also need to include suppliers of any impactful outsourced, full, or partially processed materials. And this can include your contract manufacturers. This may include other specified services, that any responsibilities be specified and communicated. So you've got this documented program, but QA is the only group that's following it. Well, that's not going to work. You know, the purchasing folks need to be following this. Receiving folks need to be aware of this program and need to follow the rules. The folks that are doing the laboratory inspections, everybody needs to have an awareness and needs to be following the program, because otherwise that could lead to chaos and non-conforming finished product. And, of course, you need to have some kind of contingency provisions because you may not be able to get the materials that you're looking for from your approved suppliers at all times. So I always suggest that customers have not just one primary approved supplier identified, but also have a secondary backup ready to go in the event of an emergency. A few more best practices. That the criteria be established for approving and monitoring these suppliers. And basically, here you can design whatever you want. You can decide whether you're going to base this on history of service provision or any other number of requirements. Then there be criteria established for monitoring the incoming good and service. So, for example, in the event of raw milk, I mentioned that most dairies will test the incoming raw milk for certain things. So that's part of the criteria for monitoring the incoming good or service. That records be accessible, which prove the criteria have been met. And this can include a whole variety of different things. It may include inspecting incoming materials. It may include doing sampling of some incoming materials. Again, the supplier is going to design this to make it work for their business and make it risk-based. This may include auditing your approved suppliers. I say may, because some people do, some people don't. It may require surveys. You may decide all of this on surveys that you send out. It also may include conducting testing or analyses of incoming materials. At the end of the day, the food manufacturer is going to decide what works best for their business. that approved suppliers be identified for all inputs, so goods and services, and that, of course, there be management commitment and support. And this is a huge thing because if you have an approved supplier program in place, but purchasing decides, oh, hey, today I can get flour cheaper from another supplier, they may not, and chooses to completely ignore the approved supplier program, that's going to cause issues. It could potentially cause issues with not getting the right materials in, or getting something from a risky supplier, and that could have some serious negative impacts on the finished product profile. Other aspects that are absolutely vital is that this program be absolutely visible throughout the business. And what I mean by this is that management is aware of it, purchasing is aware of it, QA, receiving, everyone who's got a stake in this needs to be aware of this program. That these divisions, of course, have to work together and they have to comply, and that someone has to be held accountable for these things. So if purchasing decides to buy something which is not on the approved supplier program, there has to be some kind of consequences so that chaos doesn't ensue. If you are within a corporate structure with multiple processing sites, consider having one program that everybody follows. At the end of the day, senior leadership has to support this. And of course, accountability needs to be put in place when the rules are not followed. And I always tell people, kiss it, make it easy to use, keep it as simple as possible so that folks will comply. Because we all know that human nature really is, if something's hard, we're just not going to do it or not do it right. So how does all this fit in with FSMA? Okay, and I know that that SafetyChain addresses the Food Safety Modernization Act on a regular basis, but I'm just going to give you real quick highlights here. We all know that this was signed into law a long time ago, and it was designed to enhance public health and food safety by requiring new things from companies, requiring companies to develop food safety plans, which include risk-based preventive controls, and the goal of this is to improve the safety of imported goods and ingredients as well through different parts of the program. Also to adopt a risk-based approach to inspection by the FDA. And what we have seen so far is that the Act has been signed into law, and 7 proposed rules are currently out for public or industry comment, and they address very specific provisions within FSMA and provide what are called proposed rules. And these are the highlights of 1 through 7. Preventive controls, number 1. Produce safety, number 2. Foreign supplier verification program, number 3. Number 4, accreditation of third-party auditors. Number 5, preventive controls for animal feed. 6, protection against intentional contamination. And the last one that has just been published at the end of January is sanitary transportation of human and animal foods. And we believe that others are likely to follow. I've highlighted the ones in orange that contain some kind of controls over suppliers. And what we expect to see is that the final rules, so everything has so far just been proposed, but that the final rules are going to be expected sometime in 2014, hopefully earlier rather than later, and that implementation is going to follow a very specific timetable published by the FDA as to who needs to comply by when. Now, side by side, we're going to look at the same general requirements that I mentioned in the previous slide, and then I've lumped all of the GFSI-recognized programs together in the first column. And then I've laid out the 3 proposed rules that contain in some way, shape, or form requirements for suppliers. So that there be a supplier approval and monitoring program documented and implemented, all required by the GFSI-recognized programs. And as far as FSMA is concerned, it's not addressed in the preventive controls for food, the proposed rule. And what I've got here, it says to be addressed in the final rule, and this came out of a meeting, a public meeting that was held, and this was presented by Dr. Taylor at that point. So we may see something when the final rule is published as to how U.S.-based suppliers U.S.-based companies need to have some kind of monitoring program for their approved suppliers. As far as the FSMA Foreign Supplier Verification Program, it is addressed. That's proposed rule number 3, but only for the foreign suppliers. And then for the preventive animal feed rule, it's not addressed at all. And so if you just quickly glance at this slide, you'll see that all the GFSI-recognized programs address all of these general requirements about an approved supplier program, and FSMA really does not unless the supplier happens to fall under the foreign supplier verification proposed rule. So nothing magical on this slide either. Again, all the GFSI-recognized programs address all of these general requirements in some way, shape, or form, and FSMA only addresses these in the Foreign Supplier Verification Program, if at all. And you'll note that I've got question marks for the PCs for human food rule, and that's because we don't know whether or not these may be integrated into the final rule once it becomes final. So, sum this up, FSMA does not address supplier approval and monitoring programs for domestic suppliers to U.S. sites, and for the sites that have to comply to the Food Safety Modernization Act. It does address supplier approval and monitoring for foreign suppliers through the Foreign Supplier Verification Program to sites that need to comply with FSMA. And in summary, if sites truly meet supplier approval and monitoring programs that are detailed in the GFSI-recognized schemes that they've got in place, they will meet and exceed FSMA requirements for supplier monitoring. So in order to prepare for FSMA's rules, and again, I stress these are all proposed rules at this point since they have not been made final, what you'll recognize is this slide has the same exact information that I shared a few slides back as far as best practices. If you meet best practices for a GFSI-recognized supplier management and approval program, you will meet the requirements for FSMA for monitoring your approved suppliers. And very quickly, we can help you. Very quickly, Ecolab, you guys might know us. We're a little company. We're a leader in water, hygiene, and energy technologies and service across various industries. Food manufacturing is one of many, food service, food retail, many other parts of the industry around the world. And as far as the GFSI-recognized programs, we do help through training. We also do consulting, and we also support. So, for example, if you are one of our customers and you are purchasing cleaning and sanitation chemicals from us, we show you that our service meets GFSI program requirements, and then we also provide you the kind of documentation that you need in order to prove that the materials that you are using are suitable for use within your facility and that our people are trained, competent, and capable to help you do this. And real quick, we do have a lot of training, and Barbara is going to share this information with you after the webinar via email, but we do have regularly scheduled classes. We do on-site. We also have answer a lot of questions as well. So right now, back to Barbara.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lorca. That was great information. What we're going to do now, I'm going to take us out of full screen, and while I give you a little bit of information about how automation with food safety chain management or a food safety chain management system can help you automate the many requirements of the program that Dr. Lorca just walked us through. While I'm doing that, you can see on the right-hand side the Q&A tab now. You can enter your questions in that lower box. Hit send, and we'll have those all queued up. So obviously, there's a lot of moving parts to GFSI and, of course, the GFSI Approved Vendor Programs. And more companies are realizing that to manage all of this across an entire organization via paper is just really not an effective way to go. And that's why we're seeing such rapid adoption of solutions such as food safety chain management. At the very highest level, food safety chain management is about saying what you do, doing what you say, making sure it works, and making sure it's documented. So all of your requirements are defined in these systems, including your GFSI requirements and your Approved Vendor Program requirements. All of the safety plans and data sources required to meet those requirements are also set up in the system. There's then a workflow engine to help you do what you say with task scheduling, and this includes the scheduling of tasks like making sure that you're getting audit documents from suppliers or COAs or any of the other information that you might require with notifications that go out automatically. This can be to the manager in a plant, the line manager, saying notification that the metal detectors need to be calibrated. But in this case, it would be notifications, to suppliers about documents due. All of the information then goes into a verification engine to make sure it works. There's real-time analysis with escalating alerts. If a COA or another test result comes in from a supplier and it's not within spec, there's a nonconformance, an alert will go out so that you can catch that before that product goes into production or passed on into commerce. There's a central repository of every form, every document, every record, every test result, every CAPA. It's all time and date stamped. So what this does is give you accessible, actionable data for trending. It gives you compliance with your GFSI and your Approved Vendor Programs, on-demand audit readiness, and, of course, peace of mind knowing that your programs are being carried out correctly. Now, that's the 30-second answer to how it works, but what does it do? How does it support GFSI? On the big picture, it's helping you automate the management of all your documents and records. It's making sure that you are always using the most current documents, forms, and program versions. It's automatically scheduling all of your tasks with auto notifications when components are due. It's giving you real-time data for trending, and it's allowing you to organize all of your documents for audit readiness. Looking a little closer at how food safety chain management supports a Approved Vendor Program, so we start again up at the top at number 1. All of the requirements are defined along with all of the scheduling. So all of the notifications that go out internally and to the suppliers when a document or some other test results or anything is due with escalating alerts. So everything is set up. You can start to get information if you're looking at raw materials for some of the growers, even before something ships. You can get information through mobile devices on safety assessment forms that show something. They can even show pictures so that you can get pre-harvest data and that you're able to see if this has been in spec and actually stop a shipment before it comes because this is being sent to you online. When you receive all of the inbound documentations, test results, auditor certificates, auto notifications, again, they're analyzed to spec and alerts go out if there's a non-conformant. Every piece of your supplier data is time and date stamped. It's all available in the central repository of data, and the result is compliance, prevention, and transparency. So all of the alerts and notifications help you be in compliance. You can manage by exception. Instead of having to go through 500 supplier documents to find the 1 or 2 or 3 that have an issue that you need to deal with, you're seeing those by alert. The rest can go on to the next point in your chain. You can organize your suppliers and all of their associated records any way that makes sense for your organization. You can do it by product type. You can do it by risk. You can do it by raw materials. The corporate FSQA folks now have an overview of what's going on with your supplier programs from all facilities in one central place. And most important here, you've got audit documentation on SafetyChain for food. Our customers include suppliers and growers, manufacturers and co-packers, brokers and distributors, as well as food service and retail companies. Our areas that we can help you include supplier compliance, FSQA program management, process management, regulatory GFSI customer compliance, as well as mobile data capture. And these are our modular solutions, which I just mentioned. Because of the way that we take all of the information online, it's all analyzed in real time according to spec, with alerts going out if there's a problem, whether that is a problem with a supplier documentation, with the actual safety or quality specifications from a supplier, or any other place in your value chain. That's helping you be proactive. It's helping you prevent problems before they start versus reactively trying to figure out where a problem was and how to repair the damage. You can really think of SafetyChain as your smoke alarm in the cloud. And with that, we're going to get to the questions. For those of you that might need to leave at the top of the hour, I see you've got a ton of questions. I think we might be here for a little while. Let me just give you some follow-up information. We've got the information there for Dr. Lorca and for Ecolab. If you need any follow-up information about their training and services, or if you want to contact Tatiana directly, her email address is there. We will, by end of business on Tuesday, we will send you an email that has the slides and the recording from today. You can also request an ROI calculator, a private demo, or pricing. Got some great events coming up. One of our customers, Florida Distillers, is going to be sharing their start to finish, the good, the bad, and the ugly automation project. A lot of lessons learned and great insights. Our FSMA Friday at the end of this month is going to be on food defense, and we're going to be interviewing Debbie Nuslo about her new book, Food Safety Management Programs, Applications, Best Practices, and Compliance. And you can register for all of those events on our website. So with that, if you are ready, Dr. Lorca, we've got a lot of questions. One from Richard. SQF has announced an unannounced audit protocol to be implemented in June of this year. This is not a GFSI requirement. Are there other schemes such as BRC or FSSC that are going to have such a protocol? What do you think?
Richard is absolutely correct. It is not currently a GFSI requirement, and I say currently because it may be addressed in the future in the next version of the guidance document. We just don't know yet. There's always a technical committee which addresses the requirements of the guidance document, and therefore that's going to spur any of the GFSI-recognized programs to then have to put that stuff in and then get re-benchmarked. So stay tuned on that. BRC and IFS both have unannounced audit options, but right now they are optional and they are not required, and that's the key difference between those two and SQF. SQF said publicly that 1 out of 3 certification audits, certification and recertification audits must be unannounced. So that's no ifs, ands, or buts. FSSC at this point does not have or has not published their unannounced audit protocol, but I would assume that they are going to follow the same wave that everybody else is and have an optional option available soon.
Okay, I think everybody's going to be looking at that very closely. Excuse me, Marina is asking, if products are manufactured by a foreign company and purchased through a domestic broker, who is considered the supplier according to FSMA, the broker or the manufacturer?
Ooh, that's a great question. And I'll have to take a step back here, and I will defer to the FSMA experts. But based on my understanding of the proposed rule, it's whoever takes possession of that material when it comes into the U.S. So it's right now it may be the manufacturer or it could be the broker. We're really not sure. But one of the things that is important to note is that just like GFSI has been addressing the food manufacturers and other parts of the supply chain, they are also looking at brokers. And most of the GFSI-recognized programs have either a specific standard for brokers, or they have one for one in which brokers will fit. So this is something that is going to be addressed by the industry because many of you do understand the risks that happen. Under FSMA, the foreign supplier, the FSVP protocol does address the fact that whoever takes possession of this material needs to prove that it meets the same requirements that any U.S. manufactured ingredient would as well. And under the FSVP protocol, they are currently trying to decide which options will be used in order to verify this, whether it will be risk-based or whether documentation will be required of the manufacturer overseas, or whether there may be a requirement for audits. We just don't know what the final rule is going to say yet.
Sure. Okay. Joseph is asking, how do you validate the outsourced processes after reviewing the performance of the outsourced process and it shows adverse results?
That's a good question. That's if you have evidence that the material that's coming in to your facility does not meet your requirements, and the fault of that is from the outsourced process facility, then you would deal with them through your non-conforming products program. So you would have to assure that that material was identified, isolated, and otherwise isolated in order to assure that it doesn't get used by mistake. So there's a way to manage it once it gets inside your facility should you decide that it doesn't meet your requirements. Ultimately, if that material doesn't meet your requirements and you can't fix it with your supplier through either some kind of mentorship or further contracts or further engagement with that supplier, then a lot of companies will change suppliers until they get one that will actually do it right.
Okay. Gina's asking, for the confectionery industry, is chemical migration test for food contact packaging material required for every shipment and lot?
Ooh, great question. And as under SQF, BRC, and all the other GFSI-recognized programs, it is not required for every lot. Now, I say that under those schemes. You may be supplying packaging material to a candy company, and they may have this as their own customer specification. So they may require this of their of their primary contact packaging manufacturers, and that is simply a customer requirement. But what most manufacturers do is they rely on a combination of different things. First, working with an approved supplier, someone they've had a good history with, someone who they can trust, and then having the appropriate documentation on hand, like receiving the letters of guarantee, for example, for that material that says under a CFR that the raw materials used to make that packaging material are approved for use for that purpose. They also will require or rely on product specification sheets, or sometimes they're called use sheets which will describe under what conditions that packaging material should be used at. So there's a lot of different things that a company can rely on.
Okay, lot of information here. Jane is asking, is SafetyChain software 21 CFR compliant? Yes, it is. Let's see, Dennis, for you, Tatiana, as for the Foreign Supplier Program currently and the proposed FSMA, what kind of documentation is needed, and would it be needed for raw products, vegetables, for example, from a U.S. supplier from another country?
Ooh, good question, and I would have to take a step back and do a little bit of research in order to give you the most accurate answer on that. But as I mentioned, right now all these rules are still provisional, so we don't know what's required, and that could change if the options that are currently on the table change. So just a little bit of background, there are the couple of options that are out there. One is that this be a risk-based program and be a little bit more flexible for a manufacturer. So the manufacturer would set the criteria as to what kind of documentation they would require, and then how they would prove that. So that's option one. There's another option out there that would say, okay, well, for high-risk stuff, then you should have a copy of the food safety plan. So there's lots there. This is still up in the air. So as far as if you're working with with suppliers now, I would try to get as much information as possible from them. You may not be able to get a letter of guarantee from a cantaloupe grower, for example. It's all going to depend on the type of company that you're working with and what kind of what ability they have in order to create this kind of documentation. But most of them should be able to provide you with some kind of documentation that says, hey, you know, we meet FDA requirements for the material that we are shipping you.
Okay. I would say we're pretty close to the top of the hour here. If you are leaving us, have a wonderful rest of your day. Happy Valentine's Day. We'll be getting you the slides and the recording by close of business on Tuesday. And if you're enjoying a 3-day weekend, have a great one. And for those of you that are not leaving, we still have some questions, and we're going to stay on for a little bit longer and see if we can get to those. So with that, another question, does SafetyChain provide validation reporting, comprehensive reporting? Yes, we do. Tatiana, back to you from Sarah. On the supplier list, is it acceptable to only go back to the broker, or does each supplier actually have to be included?
Oh, that's a great question. Ultimately, what you will find is this really should be risk-based. You know, perhaps for your low-risk materials, you could refer back to the broker, but ultimately, the material is coming into your facility. You want to be able to prove what you are receiving as safe. Most of my customers will actually get the information either directly from the suppliers or from the brokers. In the good brokers these days that are seeing what's happening out in the marketplace now, what food manufacturers are requiring, are making this kind of documentation available to their customers as well.
Okay. Sarah is saying procedures are usually internal. How then can we evaluate procedures if the supplier isn't GFSI certified?
That's a good question. Ultimately, you know, you need to decide as a business how you're going to handle this. If the procedures are internal, so I guess what I'm assuming Sarah means that they may be confidential and that supplier may not wish to share those with them. In those cases, you can push to get those procedures. it ultimately becomes your requirements as their customer, what you're going to ask them for. You could ask for the procedures and advise them of your ability to protect their confidentiality and their confidential records. In other cases, I've seen some customers who will just say, okay, well, in that case, I need to see a copy of your latest audit results. And that may be a GFSI certification, or it may actually be a food safety inspection done by a third party, something. And at the end of the day, you can go visit them and see it for yourself.
Okay. Ron is asking, what does GFSI stand on temperature monitoring, and will this be part of the program?
Ooh, good question. There is no defined requirement within GFSI that addresses temperature monitoring specifically. Ultimately, it all falls into assuring that the material that's coming in to your facility is suitable for use. And if you want to require temperature monitoring as part of that, then that's completely and totally up to you. The same would be said for any outgoing materials. So the manufacturer has the option to do what they need to do in order to assure that the finished product is going to be suitable by the time it reaches the next customer, which could be the grocery store or it could be the next distribution center. If they wish to use temperature monitoring, that's up to them.
Okay. I love this. Stephen, Dr. Lorca mentioned the involvement of purchasing. Wouldn't they be critical in terms of making sure suppliers know that if they don't comply, you won't do business with them anymore? It seems that the purchasing folks would have a stronger arm here than the QA folks. What are your thoughts on that?
I would agree, and I would say this is the opportunity for the QA folks to influence the purchasing folks and to explain the whys behind certain things, which can only help with compliance from the purchasing folks. But yeah, you're absolutely correct. They ultimately are the ones that sign the checks, so they're the ones that have the biggest influence.
Great. Carol's asking, what kinds of documentation should I be asking my suppliers for, and should I be asking all of them for the same things?
Excellent question. Ultimately, the best thing to do is to look at your suppliers and bucket them out into risk. I would start with risk of the materials that they are supplying you with. From your low risk, I would ask everybody for perhaps that warm fuzzy letter, which is the letter of conformance, which says, hey, you know, we're making this and it meets regulatory requirements. Thank you. Goodbye. I call it the warm fuzzy letter because it's going to be signed by an official and it's not going to have a whole lot of information in it other than they promise to comply. So that would be the one thing. The other thing I would do is send them out a survey asking to identify the kinds of controls that they have. For example, if they are supplying you with an ingredient, does the supplier have other allergens in the facility? If so, do they have an allergen control program? So things like that, which would give you an insight as to what kinds of controls are in place in that facility. And that would be very useful if you have suppliers that aren't certified to any of the GFSI-recognized programs that would require them to address and fully control those. Other things that you could be asking your suppliers for is going to depend on the risk of the material. So from your direct contact packaging manufacturers, I would ask for product specifications for the materials, product use guidelines for that material, which state this is how the packaging material should be used, and also for the letters of guarantee. And if I know that some packaging manufacturers will also provide you with a certificate of analysis which would be specific to each lot or batch that you receive. So I would be strictest with your suppliers of your most risky materials into your facility and ask them for more than for anything else.
Great. And, well, sorry for the sound effects there. I'm apparently dropping things all over my desk today. And this is an area, you know, where technology can really help you organize what you need from the different suppliers and make sure that you get it and alerts go out. A question from Larry. I'm hearing from some of my suppliers that they're switching to a different GFSI scheme this year. Why would they do that?
Good question. Well, we are seeing some of that, and that's pretty typical. Some of the reasons vary. One, for example, a site may be purchased by another company. I had this up in the Minneapolis area. I was working with a bakery that had been successfully certified to one scheme, and then they got purchased by a company in the UK, and the UK company said, okay, we don't care that you did this one scheme, you're going to do the BRC. So they fought, but they had to do what the new parent wanted. That's one thing that can happen. Sometimes a facility will realize that, hey, you know what, we actually like one over the other, and they'll move in that direction. Sometimes they will make the change based on a new customer base. So I actually had one customer that all of a sudden started to get a bunch of customers in the UK, and the buyers in the UK were very adamant and said, well, you know, we want you guys to do BRC, so they switched over. So ultimately that happens a lot. I'm hearing a few whispers from folks that aren't happy about the unannounced audit requirement under SQF, and some of them have said they would switch over. Ultimately, I don't think that's a very good idea. It's, you know, the program should really be which one fits your company culture better and which one actually makes you a better business. Some businesses need something that's more prescriptive. Others need something that is less prescriptive. Ultimately, it's what's going to help make your business improve and keep your products safe.
And I'll throw in my little technology plug. If you implement this kind of technology, you will be audit ready all the time because everything will be there and it will be time and date stamped and documented. Dennis is saying, currently the BRC scheme, do you need documentation stating food contact gear? Excuse me. For example, sleeve guards, gloves, are FDA approved?
Ooh, good question. No. There's nothing in there that is that specific. You do have to prove that whatever touches the food isn't going to pose a risk. So however you do that would be up to you.
Okay, and from Kevin, how do I deal with the gap between when a supplier's GFSI certificate runs out and a new certificate is issued if I'm audited in the interim?
Ooh, excellent question. Well, ultimately, if the auditor just happens to land on that supplier, and it would first behoove you to, before your audit, make sure that that you reach out to your suppliers and you know, just do a double check to make sure that everybody's up to speed and you have everything that you need from them and that their certificates are all valid. If not, then reach out to that supplier individually. Sometimes what will happen is the certificate will expire. It'll be in that holding period, and it may lapse, and that's an issue. But you address that during audits, and you identify the supplier as being part of your Approved Supplier Program. You'd have to then identify, you know, what your corrective action is going to be for that. You know, you'll contact them in X amount of time in order to assure that you receive the updated certificate or that information. You can also check the website as well for SQF and BRC and FSSC. They all have up-to-date information for the certified companies.
Mm-hmm. And if you're using a type of technology where alerts have been sent out, hopefully you can show the auditor the alert that's been sent out and that you are aware of the fact so that you don't get caught by surprise. I'm going to take a quick scroll here, but I do believe that was the last question. I don't know if you see anything. We should both be seeing the same thing. But I think that was the last one. If for some reason you had a question in there that we missed, you can send that question to these addresses here that you see, to Dr. Lorca's email address if it's about SafetyChain, info@safetychain.com, and we'll make sure that you get that. And with that, thank you so much. This is why we love having you join us. Great presentation. Thank you so much, Dr. Lorca, and thank you everybody for joining us. And I hope everybody gets something sweet today.
Thank you all. Thank you, Barbara.